So today we're going to talk about how to draw a box. If you've read through any of my lessons, you'd notice that I deal with perspective in a somewhat different manner than most people. I don't like thinking in terms of hundreds of vanishing points all plotted out and knowing exactly where each line is going to go. It's very mathematical, which I do like because it's harder to make mistakes, but at the same time it takes so long and it takes the energy out of a drawing. Instead, I like to look at approximating perspective, knowing roughly where my vanishing points are going to be and trying to work around that. So because of this, drawing boxes is a great way to start getting a sense of how to approximate perspective. The reason is that each box represents 3D space. It's made up of three sets of planes, three sets of parallel lines as well, each one representing one dimension in 3D space. So if you look at it like this axis might be your Y, your X, and your Z axis. And the box fits very snugly within that framework. So first let's look at how to draw a box. And this method is one that I took from someone who had actually just finished lesson 1. And their name, their Reddit user account is, what is their account? Hold on. It's Dr. something. Dr. Monkey 68. And their particular method is actually really good, and it's fairly simple and easy to understand, which I like. Had it not been for Dr. Monkey 68, I probably would have given you a much more complicated method, which would have been harder to understand. So, here's a box. It's a box in 3-point perspective, but I don't want you to think in terms of 1-point, 2-point, or 3-point perspective. Just think about the box itself. This box is sitting a little bit beneath my line of vision so I can see the top of it. And its orientation is really defined by the position of each of these imaginary vanishing points, which are somewhere off over here, somewhere off over there, and so on. They're off the canvas, and you can't see them, but you know roughly where they are. So Dr. Monkey 68's approach is to start off by drawing a Y, a sort of Y shape. And if you notice, that's going to be the internal edges of your box. Now, the reason you want to start off with this is because each line is going to point from this center to one of your imaginary vanishing points. It's a really good way to start establishing where those points roughly are going to sit. Once you've come up with that, you can start looking at, so let's just draw these out actually. Vanishing points are off in these directions. Now, you can start drawing your other lines. So if I wanted to draw this line here, so this one, I would know that this one is going to be parallel with all the other vertical lines of this box, including this one. And if it's parallel, that means it's going to be converging at the same vanishing point when drawn in perspective, which tells me that I want this line to somehow converge with this line at a point far down here. With that information, I can start kind of approximating how it's going to start converging. Really, it's hard to make a mistake on the very first of these lines, except if you draw a line that just cannot converge. For example, this one. It's very clearly getting further and further away from this line. This distance is increasing. It will converge, but it'll converge on the opposite side. It'll converge somewhere up here. So instead of doing that, you want to make sure that your vanishing point, your point of convergence, is going to be in the same direction as this one is pointing. And then you just do it again. You can do it for the other vertical line here. Same thing, you're just approximating. And then for the other lines, do the same thing. Here, if we want to draw this line, we need to look at this one. It's pointing off in this direction. So we approximate again. Eventually, this is going to converge with this. Same thing down here. This line is also parallel with this line. So they converge to the vanishing point. And the fact of the matter is that since we're approximating, chances are they are not going to meet exactly at the same point unless you are brilliant at understanding space, which at this point you probably aren't, and I sure as hell am not. So what's probably going to happen is this line here, well, if we call this A, B, and C, what you're going to see if you actually saw where they all converge, you'll see something like this. This is a bit of an exaggeration, but so A, B, C. So two of them will converge here, two of them will converge here, and they won't be at the same point. But since they are so far apart, since these vanishing points, this vanishing area, whatever, is so far away from your box, this distance really isn't that significant. And the viewer won't be able to tell. And that's what's most important. As long as it looks right to the viewer, that's all that matters. So again, we can fill in this line, leading off to the same vanishing point as that one, and same with this one. And there you have it, a box. It was actually fairly simple once you get that Y in place. Now, let's look at the one that I had pre-drawn. One thing that you might find helpful in determining whether or not there are obvious mistakes with your box is to draw through your form, which means right now we're looking at a certain set of lines that the edges that you'd visibly be able to see, but then there are edges on the other side of this box, these, which you can't see, but they are there, and acknowledging them and understanding them will help you understand the box overall and how it sits in 3D space. Now, what's important here is that there are 3 pairs of faces. This one, and this and this constitute a pair. Sorry, I'll mark them out like this so it's easier to tell which one I'm talking about. This face and this face. This face and this face. And this face and this face. When you think about the box as it sits in 3 dimensions, both of the faces of each pair are identical. The only difference is their position. So the size is the exact same. But when you think about the basic rules of perspective, it says that if you have an object that is the same, well, if you take an object and you simply change the position of that object to move it further away, it will get smaller when it's rendered in 2 dimensions, meaning when you actually draw it on a piece of paper. So on that piece of paper, it's going to look smaller. if you consider that, the only difference between this face here and this one is that this one is a little bit further away from the viewer. Based on that rule of perspective, this face has to be smaller than this one once it's drawn. If it's bigger, that's contradicting the basic rule of perspective, and therefore we know that it's wrong. So the way I usually refer to this is that you've got your near plane and your far plane. And your far plane should never be larger on the page than your near plane, because if it is, you've got a mistake. Now let's take a look at what that looks like. Now you should be able to tell that this is not a box in perspective. This face is definitely smaller than this back face. This one. So what it probably is a pyramid that's been lopped off on the top. So it's probably this. It's not a box. Now, if that's exactly what you're trying to draw, then good job, you've captured what it is. But if you're trying to draw a box, that's not what you're communicating to the viewer. And that is easily the most common mistake I see with people trying to draw boxes and accidentally screwing it up. So always keep an eye on that near plane, far plane relationship. So, last of all, let's take a look at that Y again and see different ways that you can use it to situate your box. So the one we had before was pretty simple. It actually looked like a Y that was standing upright, like this. You can have the opposite, like this, and what you're seeing here is the underside of your box. Final. So you're looking at the box from underneath. So basically in this situation, if this is the viewer, the box is up here. And you can see its underbelly. Whereas this one would be the opposite. The box would be down here, and you'd be able to see its top. There is another type of box that you might see, and that doesn't really have a Y. Instead, you see something like this. And the only situation where you're going to see that is if the viewer's head, if they're looking out like this, and the box is positioned like that. It's not above, not below. So because of this, they're not going to be able to see this top face or this bottom face. Instead, the horizon, which if you remember from the basics of perspective, is level with this viewing line, is going to cut straight through the box. So just to recap, if you want to draw some boxes, first you draw your Y shape, your 3 lined axes, or whatever. And this is going to determine where your vanishing points are, roughly, and also the size of your box. And you're going to want your other lines to converge towards the vanishing points. Sometimes it might actually help to, instead of drawing these lines, draw points. Because that way you're not going to end up with a bunch of lines that are like overextended. So if you draw a point here, knowing that this line is going to go towards the vanishing point, and then you draw a point maybe here, you can actually look at where they're going to meet. Draw another point, and then just draw the line up to there, using the ghosting technique described in Lesson 1. So same thing here. If you want it to converge to somewhere up here, this one should converge to somewhere along here. They're probably going to meet roughly there. And then draw in the line. Here, here, and they'll probably meet around here. And there's a box. Aside from that, the only other thing that I would like to explain, which you don't really need to digest right now, is about line weight. Now, it's okay at this point to just draw the same weight of line all the way across the entire box. One thing I don't want to see is people really making this middle Y line thick. Because when you do that, you're telling the eye that since this line is thick, it's probably going to be sitting at the edge of a form. That's what the eye understands anyways. But here, it's sitting right in the middle, so it makes this box look completely broken apart. It doesn't give the impression of cohesion at all. So instead, if you're going to apply extra line weight, do it on the silhouette. This will help the entire box feel more solid and feel as though all these planes, all these lines belong to the same form. Now, if you want to step it up one notch further, and if you have particularly effective control of your pressure on your pen, you can make these lines a little bit thicker, and then think about it in terms of lighting. If your light source is here, you might want to make this line here even thicker. Of course, don't go too crazy with this. Maybe just like that. And these are going to be a little bit less so. And that's giving you a little bit more dimension. It's not flattening the form out. And it gives you the sense of solidity and cohesion. And that's pretty much all I have to say on the topic of boxes. Hopefully this clarified it and will make the rough perspective and the organic perspective exercises a little bit easier. Thanks for watching.